Donald Trump's presidency was nothing if not eventful. From the moment he descended the escalator at Trump Tower to announce his candidacy, he was a force to be reckoned with. He was a lightning rod for controversy, a figure who seemed to thrive on the chaos and disruption he created. A man who thrived on chaos and disruption, he was often at the center of heated debates and chaotic scenes at his rallies. And while his pronouncements were often dismissed as the ramblings of a man untethered from reality, there was often a method to his madness. His statements, though seemingly outlandish, were calculated to provoke and to capture the public's attention. Take, for instance, his pronouncements about Canada. He didn't just make offhand comments. He made bold, sweeping statements that demanded attention. He mused openly about absorbing our neighbor to the north, of folding it into the American embrace. This wasn't just idle talk, it was a reflection of his broader vision for America's place in the world. He spoke of buying Greenland, a notion that seemed ripped from the pages of a comic book, yet it was a serious proposal that he pursued with vigor. These statements were met with derision and disbelief, with many laughing off his ideas as mere fantasies. But they also exposed a deeper truth, the enduring appeal of American expansionism. This was not a new concept, it was deeply rooted in the nation's history. Trump's rhetoric, however outlandish it may have seemed, resonated with a segment of the American population. These were people who felt a deep sense of nostalgia for a time when America was unchallenged and unafraid to assert its dominance. Those who yearned for a return to a time when America stood alone, unchallenged and unafraid to assert its dominance, found a champion in Trump. For these individuals, the idea of expanding America's borders, of extending its reach, was not merely a whimsical notion, but a righteous calling. They saw it as a way to restore America's greatness. They saw in Trump a kindred spirit, a man who shared their belief in American exceptionalism. His bold statements and actions were a reflection of their own desires and aspirations. And while Trump's pronouncements may not have resulted in any actual territorial gains, they did serve to embolden those who yearned for a more assertive, even aggressive, foreign policy. His words had a powerful impact, shaping the discourse and influencing public opinion. The impact of Trump's rhetoric was felt most acutely in Canada. The country found itself in the crosshairs of his aggressive policies and statements. Justin Trudeau, the telegenic Prime Minister, who had captured the world's attention with his progressive ideals and inclusive vision, found himself increasingly on the defensive. He had to navigate a complex and often hostile relationship with the United States. Trump's attacks on Canada, often couched in the language of trade disputes and national security concerns, struck at the heart of the Canadian identity. They challenged the very foundations of the country's relationship with its southern neighbour. They exposed the vulnerabilities of a nation that had long defined itself in opposition to its more powerful neighbour. Canadians were forced to confront the reality of their dependence on the United States. Trump's pronouncements, however absurd they may have seemed to some, were a stark reminder of the power imbalance that defined the relationship between the United States and Canada. They highlighted the challenges that Canada faced in maintaining its sovereignty and independence. They were a wake-up call, a sign that the old certainties, the assumptions that had underpinned decades of peaceful coexistence, could no longer be taken for granted. The relationship between the two countries was changing, and not necessarily for the better. Canada, under Trudeau's leadership, was forced to confront a new reality, one in which its southern neighbour was no longer a reliable ally, but a potential adversary. This new dynamic required a re-evaluation of Canada's foreign policy and its approach to international relations. Justin Trudeau, once the golden boy of Canadian politics, found his star power waning in the face of Trump's relentless attacks, which were often personal and aimed at undermining Trudeau's credibility. He had come to power promising hope and change, a fresh face for a nation weary of the Conservative Party's long reign. Trudeau's charisma and youthful energy captivated many Canadians. He spoke of inclusivity and diversity, of building a Canada that welcomed newcomers and celebrated its multicultural heritage. His vision was one of unity and progress, and for a time it seemed as if his message had resonated. Canadians were hopeful, and Trudeau's approval ratings soared. He was feted on the world stage, a symbol of progressive values in an increasingly uncertain world. Leaders from around the globe praised his forward-thinking policies. But beneath the surface of Trudeau's carefully cultivated image, cracks began to appear. His administration faced numerous challenges that tested his leadership. His commitment to environmental protection was called into question by his government's approval of oil pipelines. Environmentalists felt betrayed. His promise to reconcile with Canada's Indigenous population was overshadowed by ongoing disputes over land rights and resource extraction. These issues highlighted the gap between his rhetoric and reality, and his personal popularity, once seemingly unassailable, began to erode as Canadians grappled with rising housing costs, stagnant wages, and a growing sense of economic anxiety. The middle class felt the pinch. The COVID-19 pandemic, which swept across the globe in early 2020, only served to exacerbate these challenges. The crisis tested Trudeau's ability to lead in unprecedented times. Trudeau's government, like governments around the world, struggled to contain the virus and mitigate its economic fallout. The pressure was immense. Lockdowns and restrictions, while necessary to protect public health, took a toll on the Canadian economy. Small businesses were particularly hard hit. Businesses were shuttered, jobs were lost, and Canadians found themselves grappling with a level of uncertainty and disruption that many had never experienced before. The social fabric was strained. Against this backdrop of uncertainty and discontent, Trump's attacks on Canada landed with particular force. His words stoked fears and divisions. He accused Canada of taking advantage of the United States on trade, of being a haven for terrorists, and of posing a threat to American national security. These accusations were inflammatory. These accusations, while often baseless, resonated with a segment of the Canadian population, those who were already feeling left behind by globalization and wary of Trudeau's progressive agenda. The political landscape was shifting. Trump's rhetoric, amplified by right-wing media outlets in both Canada and the United States, served to deepen existing divisions within Canadian society and undermine Trudeau's authority. The nation was more polarized than ever. As Trudeau's star waned, a new breed of Canadian politician emerged, one who sought to capitalize on the growing sense of resentment and disillusionment among certain segments of the population. These politicians tapped into the frustrations of those who felt left behind by the rapid changes in society and the economy. These populists, like their counterparts in the United States and elsewhere, railed against the perceived excesses of globalization, the erosion of national sovereignty, and the cultural liberalism of the political elite. They argued that the political establishment had lost touch with the common people. They promised to restore a bygone era, one in which Canada was a more homogeneous, more traditional, and more self-reliant nation. They painted a picture of a simpler time, appealing to nostalgia and a longing for stability in an increasingly complex world. The rise of Canadian populism was fueled by many of the same forces that had propelled Trump to power in the United States. Economic anxiety, cultural backlash, and a deep-seated sense that the system was rigged against ordinary people. The decline of manufacturing, the rise of automation, and the influx of immigrants had all contributed to a sense of unease and displacement among certain segments of the Canadian population. These individuals, many of whom lived in rural areas or small towns, felt that their values and way of life were under attack by urban elites who were out of touch with their concerns. They felt marginalized and ignored, their voices drowned out by the louder, more progressive voices in the cities. The populist message found a receptive audience among those who felt left behind by the forces of economic and social change. They yearned for a return to a time when Canada was a more homogeneous, more traditional, and more self-reliant nation. They were drawn to politicians who promised to protect their jobs, preserve their values, and restore Canada to its former glory. These politicians spoke directly to their fears and hopes, offering simple solutions to complex problems. And they were willing to overlook the often divisive rhetoric and authoritarian tendencies of these leaders in the hope that they would deliver on their promises. The rise of Canadian populism is a testament to the power of these emotions and the deep divisions within society. Trump, with his keen instinct for exploiting social and political divisions, recognized the potential of Canada's burgeoning populist movement. He saw in these disaffected voters a mirror image of his own base, people who felt ignored and marginalized by the political establishment. And he understood that by stoking their grievances, by amplifying their voices, he could further destabilize Canada and advance his own agenda. Trump's strategy was twofold. First, he sought to undermine Trudeau's authority by portraying him as weak and ineffective, a leader who was more interested in currying favour with global elites than standing up for Canadian interests. He accused Trudeau of being two-faced and a phony, of betraying Canada's friendship with the United States. These attacks, while often personal and lacking in substance, resonated with those who were already inclined to distrust Trudeau. Second, Trump sought to drive a wedge between Canada and its allies by portraying the country as a freeloader on the world stage, a nation that benefited from the generosity of others while contributing little in return. He accused Canada of taking advantage of the United States on trade, of not paying its fair share for defence, and of being a haven for terrorists. These accusations, while demonstrably false, served to sow doubt and distrust among Canada's partners, making it more difficult for Trudeau to build strong international coalitions to counter Trump's agenda.